Decisions in the country. This march on Monday is already having a powerful effect on public opinion. First, here's ABC's Michelle Norris.
All across the country, there are signs that black men and boys are preparing to descend on Washington for the Million Man March, an event that is being billed as a day of atonement, prayer, and inspiration.
At the crack of dawn, there's going to be black sunshine all over the nation's capital.
The march has sparked interest among a wide cross-section of men, drawn by the idea of coming together in a massive show of solidarity and self-determination at a time when so many black men are plagued by drugs, crime, and unemployment.
I'm marching to support the black man and his family. It's about getting the families back together.
But if that's the organizers' goals, the fact that women were not invited has stirred controversy.
I don't feel women should be excluded. I think if women understand and support the cause, I don't see why they can't be there.
If it lives up to its name, the Million Man March could be the largest demonstration ever held in Washington. And the fact that it falls on a workday creates great potential for traffic tie-ups and gridlock.
Depending on how many people come, it very well could almost effectively shut down the city.
To avoid that, the city's subway system is planning to run extra trains, as is Amtrak. Interest in the march is so great that the impact could be felt far beyond Washington. Some school districts across the country are canceling bus service for Monday because so many drivers are headed to Washington.
This Monday, we plan to stand up and do what is right.
Organizers say the event should be treated as a spiritual holiday in the workplace, and black men who can't make it to D.C. are encouraged to take the day off and refrain from spending money in white-owned businesses.
There is no reason why people that work around the country for municipal governments or state governments and others should not be permitted to take it as a religious holiday, as people from other religions are allowed to do on their religious holidays.
Organizers say that more than 11,000 buses are headed to Washington from just about every corner of the country. But despite the turnout, the real measure of success will be what these men do with all this energy and political motivation once they return back home. Michelle Norris, ABC News, Washington.
At the center of this demonstration or manifestation is the spiritual and political leader of the black Muslims, Louis Farrakhan. Across the country, the question is being asked again. Who is Louis Farrakhan and where does he fit in the black community? And why does he make so many whites, and especially Jews, so angry? He leads a movement called the Nation of Islam, perhaps 10,000 members, perhaps more than 100,000. They will not reveal their numbers. And much of his message to black America is very appealing.
We have got to come out of the spirit of depending on others to do for us what we must do for ourselves.
Join him, he tells young black men, join his ranks, clean yourself up and take responsibility for yourself. No drugs, no guns. Discipline in the projects across the nation where his followers have taken over security. Crime is often down dramatically.
Young black men respect them, and that's part of our problem in our communities, is reaching young black men.
There is another side to Minister Farrakhan, his racial anger that he picked up along the way to where he is today. The 60-year-old minister was born in Boston. His mother raised him on welfare. He wanted to study violin at the famous Juilliard School in New York, but he became a calypso singer instead. He was brought into the black Muslim movement at the side of Malcolm X. When Malcolm X split with the Nation of Islam and was murdered, many people then and now suspected Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan is not very familiar to white America. Since the civil rights movement in the 60s, the black leaders who have become familiar are those who have demanded inclusion. Louis Farrakhan has preached something else entirely.
If we cannot get along in peace, then we have to separate. Like two married people who have tried to live together and have irreconcilable differences.
Farrakhan has an image of a separate black America, land set aside and compensation for slavery.
If we are allowed land and money, a way to become economically self-sufficient, then we would say America is beginning to repair the damage.
Minister Farrakhan has taken his message of separation to halls and arenas all across the country. Hundreds of thousands have turned out to hear him speak. They hear him talk about black pride. They also hear him speak the vilest of bigotry. This is what Farrakhan has to say about Jews.
They took the money out of your community and built communities for themselves.
He stirs up volatile emotions in his followers. He stirs up crowds that chant, "Kill the Jews." And he will lead them toward that chant. He won't say it himself.
Jews are not the only target of Minister Farrakhan's anger. Whites in general are often portrayed as the devil. In the nation's black community itself, there is division over Farrakhan, but not as much as many would imagine. The Reverend Jesse Jackson will march with Farrakhan on Monday. Others, like Congressman Gary Frank of Connecticut, say they cannot.
To give Minister Farrakhan and his organization more prominence would be one of the worst things to happen to race relations.
Certainly this much, at this time, is clear. And the co-chairman of Monday's march, Ben Chaffetz, puts it very simply.
Who else in America could have issued this call and get this type of response?
Probably nobody else at this moment, according to most sources in the black community. We'll be there in Washington on Monday for coverage of this march. And when we come back to see...
Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich says the president must do more than just talk about race relations. He says he agrees with much of what Mr. Clinton said, but adds, quote, "We need more than rhetoric," end quote. He also said race relations were not served by the leader of the Million Man March.
In the case of Farrakhan himself, I think the more people look at him, the more I think they realize he is a bigoted, hateful, divisive force. And I think it's unfortunate that he is leading the march. And I think it tells you something about how deep the symptoms are in America. People don't turn to a leader like that unless they are genuinely lacking in hope. And I think that that's a commentary on what the welfare state has done to truly trap the poor in terrible circumstances that all of us should feel ashamed about.
On the march itself, the House Speaker said he would reserve judgment until results of the rally become more apparent.
4 participants in the Million Man March traveled to Washington because the patriarch of their family is concerned about his community and his people. CNN's Candy Crowley has the journey of 3 generations of African-American men hoping to be part of history.
This is the face of black America that doesn't make headlines. Roland Caldwell Sr., a devout Roman Catholic, husband of 37 years, father of 6. He knew from the beginning he had to go.
I think all black men should go because I think it's a point in time where we need to start making a statement about, just as is advertised, we need to take over. You know, what has happened to us, what I believe has happened is we have stopped being in charge of our communities. And so we let the kids do what they want to do.
Roland Sr. coaxed his only son, 35-year-old Roland Jr., into driving up from Richmond. The 2 grandsons, 11-year-old Ramon and 6-year-old Delonte, had no choice.
The 6-year-old's ready to go, naturally. See, 11, they're at the time where they start to make their own decisions. And sometimes you have to push them into things. You have to say, you're going to do this. Later on, you'll be happy that you did. But right now, you're going to do it my way.
And so it was that 3 generations of Caldwells marched to the front door of the U.S. Capitol on October 16th.
And you may not be a significant player in those things, but just to be there, it's important. And I think just being here is important. A lot of these folk, that's all it means, just to be here, just to show up to say, I was one of the million.
Blood with blood, hand in hand, back to back, they went together.
Our values in our family, are extended, through my parents and down into me and then down into to Delonte and Ramon.
I was standing right down there, right in the middle. Martin Luther King was right up there.
Along the way, Roland Sr. talked of his last big march in the Capitol in '63, when Martin Luther King gave America something to dream about.
The difference is that was a milestone. This is a beginning. The question is going to be, what will happen afterwards?
By afternoon, Grandpa had won a convert.
I like it because I'm sure it might be history, and
look to the church.
It's just good to be
and given his son another gift.
What I'm taking home from it is to be able to look around and say, you know, well, I'm not alone. Look all around. Look around. See all the black men.
But for a 6-year-old, the sandwiches and crackers Grandpa packed and the chance to horse around were a lot more appealing than history. Besides, it was crowded and noisy, and even the adults didn't pay much attention to the speeches. But none of that matters to Roland Sr., who understands little boys.
I just want them to take away the fact that they were there. That's all the little guys need to do, is I was there, I was around all these black men, and I feel good.
The tale of the Caldwell family on October 16th was not a story about the politics of a single black man, or even a story about 1 million black men. It is a story about each black man and the world he can hold in his hands. Candy Crowley, CNN, Washington.
At times, it may have seemed more like a revival than a march.
But today's massive rally in Washington had many meanings. When this special edition of CNN World News continues, we'll look at the major issues of the march and the many possible interpretations.
In Germany, there is no word for gonzo. No word for...
I am not yet a woman, even if I pretend to be. I am tender enough to curl into the palm of your hand. I need the protection of every black man. I am not yet a woman. I need years to grow. I'm learning fast, but there's a lot I don't know.
Still a lot of wisdom at a tender age.
Sure is.
The Million Man March may have had a few central themes, but it's open to many interpretations.
And it could have many different effects. CNN's Bruce Morton has been thinking about how and when this rally could change America.
It was a day, its leaders said, of atonement and reconciliation, but it may have had as many meanings as there were men who joined it.
Let those critics of this march realize once and for all, black men are not the problem. Black men are the victim.
That was part of it, black men looking at themselves, talking about what they needed to do next. Most earlier demonstrations were aimed at the people inside the Capitol or the White House. The civil rights marchers wanted civil rights bills and got them. The anti-war marchers wanted to end the war, and it did end, finally.
It's time to empower our own people.
This gathering was aimed at the black men who joined it and at the rest of the country which watched. As for the men who were here, the orators talked about the need for independence.
We can go forward.
The need to do more about families, about wives and kids. As for those whites who watched, a lot of the speakers blamed white racism for the sad state of relations between the races. And there is probably enough blame to go around. But reporters on the mall said you often couldn't hear the speakers and that what was happening was black men talking to each other, talking common problems, common hopes, talking with people like themselves from other parts of the country. The real effect of this gathering may not be known until we know what effect all those conversations have.
Help us to check ourselves.
Black men could go home and, for instance, register the 8 million unregistered blacks to vote. They could go home and opt out of politics, which is biracial, and work instead on black institutions, churches, clubs, whatever. White watchers will react to whatever the black men do, either with respect and by being helpful where they can, or by retreating in their turn into separate white institutions. Probably most white and most black Americans share a goal.
Make America! America! For all its people!
But Americans may disagree about how to do that. Separate institutions or working towards shared equality among equals. This was no doubt a big event, big enough so that we won't know for a while just what its effects will be. Bruce Morton, CNN, Washington.
We are gathered here to collect ourselves for a responsibility that God is placing on our shoulders.
Louis Farrakhan challenges black men to unite, take responsibility, and improve their lives. More on the Million Man March next.
solidarity. But while many agree with the message, others, like Los Angeles radio host Larry Elder, criticize the messenger.
I think it's horrible that somebody so telegenic, so charismatic, such an arousing speaker has such a hateful message. He is anti-Semitic, he is homophobic, he is anti-Catholic, he is anti-white.
In New York this morning, former General Colin Powell had this to say about the Farrakhan-sponsored march.
I condemn all forms of racism or disparaging remarks against any group of Americans, whether it comes from Minister Farrakhan or anyone else.
These days, talk about racism in America is everywhere. It came to a climax at the end of the O.J. Simpson murder trial with Johnny Cochran's racially charged closing argument. Cochran's message was powerful to Simpson alternate juror Watson Calhoun.
The powers that be are all white, and it's rough on us. It is rough on us.
From the passions that surface today in Washington, it is clear that our country still struggles to be united. But tonight, we can at least be hopeful that someday we will judge each other by the content of our character.
Louis Farrakhan, but not from the march itself. For others, the quandary is whether to join the march, as Randall Pinkston reports.
From Brooklyn,
they're going like hotcakes.
To Chicago.
Check from a lady not going, but she's sending somebody. Give her a hand.
To Sacramento. The 1 million black men's march is rolling towards Washington. In Brooklyn, subway conductor Charles Smith picked up his tickets and T-shirts today.
My father participated in the one in 1963. So I think this is my turn to participate.
Amtrak is laying on extra trains in the Northeast Corridor. Traffic controllers in the Washington metropolitan area expect 11,000 buses. No estimate on how many will come by car. One sure bet, gridlock.
People should expect tremendous traffic problems on Monday morning.
By design of the organizers, the impact of the march could be felt far from the nation's capital, as schools, hospitals, and businesses gear up for a day when many of their employees won't be coming to work.
The march, led by Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, continues to attract criticism for his anti-Semitic and anti-white views.
If, however, the Ku Klux Klan were going to march to manifest the concerns of white males, it would truly be a sad day for America.
The all-male march also drew fire from a radical voice of the 70s.
No march, movement, or agenda that seeks to make women lesser partners in this quest for equality can be considered a positive step.
There's not been any political initiative that is without its critics.
Organizers insist that come Monday, controversy will be replaced by celebration. Randall Pinkston, CBS News, New York.
Beginning. The question is going to be what will happen afterwards.
Good.
So the march is over. Has the journey just begun? A big question hanging over the rally is, what's next?
And we'll revisit some of the dramatic moments of the day.
World News is brought to you by Hewlett-Packard DeskJet and LaserJet printers.
President Clinton spent the day far from the nation's capital and the march, but he still took the opportunity to address race relations, and his speech became a subject of commentary at the march itself. CNN senior White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer is traveling with the president.
Thank you. The president's message on this day of the Million Man March was simple.
America, we must clean our house of racism.
After considerable debate among his staff, Mr. Clinton decided he had no choice but to speak out at this previously scheduled address at the University of Texas at Austin. He asked black and white America to understand each other's fears.
White America must understand and acknowledge the roots of black pain. It began with unequal treatment, first in law and later in fact. On the other hand, blacks must understand and acknowledge the roots of white fear in America. There is a legitimate fear of the violence that is too prevalent in our urban areas.
The president praised the stated goals of the marchers in Washington while condemning Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, the man who brought them there.
1 million men are right to be standing up for personal responsibility. But 1 million men do not make right one man's message of malice and division.
He did not mention Farrakhan by name, but Farrakhan later responded.
I must hasten to tell you, Mr. President, that I'm not a malicious person, and I'm not filled with malice. But I must tell you that I come in the tradition of the doctor who has to point out with truth what's wrong.
One civil rights leader complained the president should have condemned Farrakhan by name.
Well, Mr. President, start being honest and start being candid and call this apostle of anti-Semitism and this apostle of black racism by name.
Never before has America seen such a gathering of African-American men pledging to heal black America and in turn help heal all of America. Led by controversial Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, they prayed and sang in a rally of atonement and brotherhood. Here's Channel 7's Deborah Weiner.
They came to be counted as 1 in a million. They came from many different places for many different reasons.
Well, my son's 10 years old. Today I'm making an investment on his future. I bought my son so he can see history in the making.
Fathers and sons, Muslims and Christians, young and old. It was a call from the controversial Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan that brought them all together.
But we are gathered here to collect ourselves for a responsibility that God is placing on our shoulders to move this nation toward a more perfect union.
Farrakhan's past remarks about Jews and other ethnic groups have made him a divisive figure. Earlier today, President Clinton condemned Farrakhan, even as he praised the men participating in the march.
1 million men are right to be standing up for personal responsibility. But 1 million men do not make right one man's message of malice and division.
Farrakhan insisted he has no malice and offered to open a dialogue with the Jewish community.
You got pain, but we got pain too. You hurt, we hurt too. And ending the pain may be good for both and ultimately good for the nation.
Many prominent black leaders attended the march, saying they supported its message of personal responsibility. Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, entertainer Stevie Wonder, civil rights leader Jesse Jackson, and the poet Maya Angelou. March organizers say more than 2 million men attended. The U.S. Park Police estimate the crowd at 400,000. The real question now is not how many men participated in the march, but what will they do when they get home? It is unclear if this is the beginning of a new movement or if it is just an isolated, though historic, event. Deborah Weiner, ABC News, Washington.
Back here in the Bay Area, hundreds of African Americans held symbolic marches of their own. In Oakland, more than 100 black men marched around Lake Merritt and then gathered to talk about personal responsibility and improving their lives. At San Jose State University, about 100 black students voiced their support. They also held an open mic forum and a teach-in to discuss today's events in Washington. At Diablo Valley College in Contra Costa County, some students protested an on-campus forum supporting the march. While most favor the rallying call for black unity, they also oppose the racist rhetoric of Louis Farrakhan.
The problem with this is teachers are taking a stance on this issue to follow this racist, and this is wrong.
We believe in what he's doing, but we also have a mind of our own to stop and know what's right and what's wrong.
I'm in favor of people getting together to discuss these issues. I would very honestly have preferred that the march had been thought of by someone else.
Dan Martin, who helped organize today's forum, says that students should not mistake the message for the messenger.
The Million Man March is also supported by women in the Bay Area. A coalition of women groups marched in downtown San Francisco this afternoon. They say black women and children need a better life as well. They went to the Market Street office of Senator Dianne Feinstein protesting the recent vote on cutting welfare.